I like to have recordings and a complete file.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of the recording, this is a shortened lesson in the theme of favorite Bible stories. We're just going to get started on the discussion of Abraham. Today is actually Pentecost, which would make it a good lesson in itself, but that's not what we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with Abraham. The book of Genesis, I would say that the Abraham account makes up half of it. It's a major portion of the whole book of Genesis to get Abraham and his family started. That's what this is about. As I said in this document that I sent to folks this week, it's too long of an account for me to list actual pieces of text. So that's why I went to the outline format here and just said, you're on your own. Read your own Bible. Sit down one afternoon. It'll take you an hour or two to read 14 chapters of Genesis. It's an interesting story. I would say that the story of Abraham is. Oh, hi, Mike. We're starting in an abbreviated way because we have so little time today. So I've cut out my music. I even cut out the healing prayer. I'm just kind of setting the stage for our discussion of Abraham. Abraham is the beginning of the story of the Hebrews. In fact, the first time that the word Hebrew is used in Genesis refers to Abraham. So he is the first Hebrew. Now, I think we all have an idea of who or what Abraham is. The founder of the faith, he's also known as Father Abraham. So he's the father of the faithful. But I was surprised, a long time since I've read through this story in detail. I was surprised how much trouble God had with Abraham. God chooses Abraham, clearly chooses Abraham. And I think one thing that's revealed in this whole account is the patience that God shows. Because I don't know, if it had been you or me, maybe we would have said, okay, I guess I'm going to choose someone else because this isn't working well. But anyway, Abraham is chosen. Actually, his father was chosen in a sense. He was told he took his family and moved towards Canaan, but didn't quite get there. The place was midway between Ur and Canaan, is something called Iran, I think. It's not Iran, that's Haran. Anyway, and then so that's where Abraham is called from. He says, God tells Abraham, get up, move to Canaan. You're gonna be a blessing to all the nations. He is 75 years old at this point. So he's already an old man. Sarah's an old woman. She has been barren all her life. And obviously at 75, you could imagine that couple had given up hope. There were not going to be children. That was just the way life was for them. In the Jewish culture, that really is a sad ending, because that means you're cut off. Their concept of eternal life was through the longevity of your family. So they were done. Anyway, Abraham does what he's told. That's the first time we see in my little outline with the blue text, I say that this is an example of covenant and faith. God says to Abraham, I'm going to make you a blessing for all nations. And Abraham says, okay, takes his family and moves. That's a faithful act. But then he stumbles for the first time. The place where he's moved to suffers a drought. Now, you would think if you were a faithful Abraham and you were responding to God telling you to move to Canaan, things got a little tough in Canaan. You might ask God to help solve your problem, but he doesn't. He takes his family down to Egypt, where I guess they are not suffering from drought. So this is what I mean by God's patience. God tells him to go to Canaan, and he does. But then when things get a little tough, he apparently doesn't even ask God, what's going on. He just takes his family to Egypt. And then there's something even worse. I put the word deception there. It occurs to Abraham as he's moving his family down to Egypt for this time because of the drought, that Sarah is a beautiful woman. And he's afraid that Abraham will be killed or some other way hurt because the Egyptians will want to take Sarah. So he colludes with Sarah to hide her identity. He says, tell them you're my sister. Now, actually, that's not a lie. They are half siblings. The incest rules were different in the beginning of the Bible. So honestly, so technically it's not a lie. She is his sister. But what is the lie is in the deceiving. They're man and wife. And they don't tell the Egyptians that. And as a process, so in part of the process, the Sarah is taken into the king's court. But the king, interestingly enough, is in contact with God. An angel actually appears to the king and says, wait a minute, you're sleeping with another man's wife. And the king says, what? And so the truth comes out, and you have the strange scene where the king of Egypt is rebuking Abraham on behalf of God, really, for being a liar and not trusting your own God, basically. So that ends that first story of the deception. The king doesn't hurt Abraham. In fact, he blesses Abraham. Abraham gains in wealth during this sojourn. Okay. Abraham has a brother, Lot. We all kind of know that story connected to the Sodom and Gomorrah. We'll get there in a little bit. But Abraham and Lot. Now they are sharing Canaan. God has told them to go to Canaan. And it's supposedly, the place of milk and honey. But they are so wealthy. I guess this is the bad side. They have so many flocks and people to support. They can't tolerate living close to each other. They just are overgrazing the land. So it's Abraham's idea to divide Canaan. By the way, he didn't request God, he didn't ask God about this either, but still, it's his idea. And being a nice guy, he says to Lot, okay, look out before you. You can see this entire land. If you go that way, I'll go that way. If you go that way, I'll go that way. You choose. Well, Lot is a little devious, and so he looks and sees the gentle, well-watered plain. So he takes the well-watered lowland. Can't remember now if that was the east or the west, but it doesn't matter. Basically, Lot takes the best choice. But Abraham doesn't renege. He says, okay, and they go off. So now they're separated. Okay. I'm going to skip down to another. But time is passing. Abraham was 75 when this whole story starts. And more time has passed. I'm losing track of the exact number of years, but it's been a while. And so Abraham basically asks God, how am I to know this? I know what you've said. Show me. Now, I guess one way that God could have shown him would have been to bring about the circumstances and Sarah could have a child. But instead, we get the story that I called God signing the covenant. There's the strange account where God tells Abraham to divide several animals. Now, Abraham knew exactly what was going on, but for most of us who don't live in that culture, we have no idea what's going on. He takes a lamb and cuts it in half down the middle and lays the two pieces side by side. He takes a number of sacrificial animals, divides them physically in half, which is kind of a gory thing, and lays the parts so that there is an aisle between dead animal parts. Now, this takes a little bit of time. It's very bloody. And time passes such that the animals begin to attract vultures. That's how, this is gory. It's awful. Anyway, what Abraham was doing was setting up a contract. In that culture, they didn't sign a paper. Two people, two men usually, who were going into contract, set up this sacrificial picture. And then they walked through this aisle side by side. And while they walked through it, they repeated the terms of the contract to each other. That was how you made a contract. So again, God tells Abraham, set this thing up. So Abraham knew what the context was. But what he didn't know was what happened next. Abraham falls asleep. And then in his vision, he sees a burning, smoking pot, like a tar pot or I don't know what the other oil. Okay, this burning thing. And it passed up and down through the pieces of the bodies. It wasn't Abraham and God walking up and down. The image is supposed to be God by himself walking up and down. The pot of burning stuff is a symbol for God. So God makes the covenant. He doesn't even need not Moses, Abraham. He doesn't need Abraham to sign the document. God signs the document. In a covenant with God, there's no equal party. There's no other equal party. That's another message here. God creates the covenant with Abraham. Okay, now, you're a believer. You're supposed to be a faithful believer, Abraham, right? You would think he would get it by now. But notice the next story is the Hagar story. So you've got a covenant with God. He has shown you in a convincing vision that you have a covenant with God. But you still begin to wonder, how is it that we're going to have children? We're just so old. Sarah is barren. So Sarah is actually the one that comes up with the idea. She's not happy about it later, but initially, Sarah says, well, maybe God means that you will have sex with my maid and she'll have the child. That's where the Hagar story begins. Abraham, even despite his covenant and faith in the first part of the book, he says, oh, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe that's how this is going to work. And so we have the story of Hagar with Abraham. Abraham gets Hagar pregnant, and the son born of that is Ishmael. Abraham's firstborn is not Isaac, it's Ishmael. But God comes to Abraham and says, no. Now, maybe God could have acted a little earlier and prevented the procedure that gave rise to Ishmael. But anyway, Abraham learns that I meant that you and Sarah were going to have a child, which would be the father of many nations. So this isn't going to work. At this point, we also have the establishment of circumcision. This may be where the word Hebrew is used for the first time. I'd have to check on that to be sure. But God makes a physical sign among his faithful of the circumcision. So Abraham, of course, is already an adult, very old. Ishmael is also young. I can't remember, 10 or 11 years old, something like that. So this story has moved on. Another 10 years has passed. Anyway, finally, we get to the story of the three visitors. Abraham welcomes three visitors one afternoon in their tent. It's a hot day, so they're sitting in the shade. This is where one of the visitors, well, all the visitors are angels. One of the angels says to Abraham, repeats the promise, you're going to have a child. This is where Sarah laughs in the tent. Remember that story? Abraham scoffs at the story. He's lost the focus. And the angel says, no, I mean it. A year is going to pass and it will be done. 1 year. Now down to the time frame is down to 1 year. And sure enough, there is a child born a year after this. This is also where we have the story of, well, what was the other purpose for the angels to be there? That they repeated the covenant, which was good, but they were really there in judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. Another example where God's judgment is strenuous and serious. And so he has come to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of its awful evil. This is also where you get Abraham negotiating with God over. The question is a good one. He asks, are you going to destroy the faithful with the evil? And God, that's where it starts at 50. If I find 50 faithful people in Sodom, I won't destroy the city. For the benefit of the faithful, I will save the city. And then Abraham says, forgive me, Lord. Okay, we got. What if it's only 40? For the sake of 10, the difference of 10, would you destroy the whole city? I mean, it's a good argument Abraham is making. And they work their way down. I don't remember if it's actually 50, 40, 30. But anyway, they get down to 10. Okay, they get down to 10. And so he says, okay, for the sake of the last 10, if I can find 10 righteous people in Sodom, we won't destroy the city. And of course, there aren't 10 righteous people in the city of Sodom. So we get the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. In that story, it's the details include, remember, the visitors arrive. When the visitors arrive in the city, they intend to stay in the town square and observe the city. And Lot says, "Oh, you don't want to do that. This is not the kind of place where you hang out all the evening." You can imagine it'd be like, what would you do if your friend wanted to hang out in a place? We had to have some other similar place, but anyway, Lot says, "Please come to my house," and so they do. They come to his house instead. And this is where the men of the town try to get Lot to let the angels come out and play. And the angels strike the people blind so that they can escape. Lot and his family do escape. And so the city is about to be destroyed. They are warned not to look back. Lot's wife looks back. You know the story of the pillar of salt. It's not the physical act of looking back. It's the longing
to go back there.
Right. That's what it was. For her, the sin is to think longingly about that sinful state. Weren't things great when we lived in Sodom? Yeah. Anyway, so that's the end of that. Abraham has another round. I had forgotten this, by the way, until I read this account. He does exactly the same thing with the king named Abimelech as he did with the king of Egypt. They have returned to the area. There is a king there who Abraham is worried will be attracted to Sarah. Sarah must have been awfully beautiful. Now, she's very, very old at this point. I don't know exactly, but so again, Abraham does the same lie. She's my sister, but this time, Abimelech does not cross the line with Sarah. But an angel again appears to Abimelech and says, "Do you realize she's another man's wife?" Abimelech, just like in the previous case, calls Abraham and rebukes him again on behalf of God. Here we have a pagan. Well, we don't know. He was not a Hebrew, but he was sufficiently persuaded by God to act as an agent of God. I'm not sure where we place him in the pantheon of things, but so he's not a believer in the true sense, but he at least is following God's orders here. He rebukes Abraham for potentially putting him in bad, because he says, if I had slept with another man's wife, I would be the guilty one. Abimelech also provides wealth to Abraham. Abraham's power and wealth is growing. And we finally get to chapter 21, where we have Isaac being born of Sarah. Sarah is, I don't know, close to 100 years old at this point. So I think one of the things to recognize is that it is a miraculous birth. Anyway, now that Isaac's on the scene, I'm going to run through this last part quickly. Now that Isaac's on the scene, Hagar and Sarah and Ishmael and Isaac, there's tension in the camp. It is clear that Isaac is the heir, but remember, Ishmael is the firstborn, and he's also been around for at least a dozen years before Isaac comes along. So it would be easy to see how Hagar and Ishmael would misunderstand the situation. So there is a step and a half, another step. The initial one is that Hagar runs away kind of on her own with Ishmael. An angel says, no, go back. You'll be safe. But more time passes, and Abraham and Sarah agree that this is just an intolerable situation. So Hagar and Ishmael are finally put out of the camp. This is a terrible thing. In that time, in that environment, a woman on her own, even with a young teenager, very, very risky. It was almost like a death sentence. But an angel appears to Hagar and provides food and water, and also gives a blessing. So in the course of this story, Hagar doesn't get the heir blessing. He doesn't get the same blessing as Isaac, but he definitely gets a blessing of God's benefits. So that's a complication in this story. But anyway, to finish this up, we also know the story. Isaac now is born. He's a young boy. And at one point, God tests Abraham by saying, take your son and burn him on an altar. Abraham goes. And at the last minute, God provides a ram for the sacrifice. That's called the testing of Abraham. Sarah dies first. Abraham buys. He was offered the land. The king said, bury your dead. You're welcome to a grave. Don't worry about it. Abraham was adamant that he wanted to own the place where Sarah was buried. So he did buy the land. Sarah is buried. There's a story about the finding of the bride for Isaac. And then Abraham dies, I think, at the age of like 180, something like that. He passes away. But the important thing is the covenant has been continued. Isaac is born. The story here has him married. So the next step are the two sons, Jacob and Esau. So the covenant story is about to take off. That's where we are in the book of Genesis. Okay, that's the whole picture. I intend to go back and chop it into reasonable sections and discuss these issues, especially of covenant and faith, and in some sense, judgment too. Thoughts or questions before we?
Well, I was just disappointed it didn't do the wisecrack. It was there. Abraham had a brother who he liked a lot. I was waiting for you to say that.
That's a good one, Doug. Yeah, I see you're learning something in this class. Oh, what can I say?
It's just not rife with one-liners. It's serious stuff.
You were just taking this way too serious.
Well, yeah, this is a very serious story, but as I said, it just was amazing to me how many times God had to tell Abraham about the covenant.
Yeah.
Because he would apparently either forget it, I doubt he really forgot it, but he discounted it or
Distrusted it.
distrusted, doubt and distrust.
Yeah.
So anyway, I won't go through that again. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer and then we can do this again next week. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep, sorry for the abbreviated session. And there's nobody from home, so I'm